is obviously the violence. So I'm just going to read out one of the misconceptions, and then we're going to go straight into a question where we can go on and get some answers. So the first misconception is violence, okay? And I'm just going to read this out as it was stated. It said, Africa is inundated with civil wars, cross-border wars, inter-ethnic fighting, coup riots are covered superficially without content, portraying Africa as a continent and endless strife. So that is the misconception that a lot of the media outlets do portray. And even from BBC, he stated that he was there to take coverage on the Civil War as well as also the verdict on Charles Taylor. So the question that we're going to throw to our panel for tonight and also to everyone is, how often, okay, has the said type of wars, which includes civil, cross-border wars, inter-ethnic wars, inter-ethnic fighting, coup riots, how often has these wars occurred in your country in its modern state of government?
You want to start with me? No, we'll start with the ladies. Ladies first.
I'll just start off like this. Sorry, where's this about? Wait, what's the question again? Sorry.
The question is, how often has the said type of wars, which includes civil, cross-border wars, inter-ethnic fighting, coup riots, occurred in your country in its modern state of government?
I would say that the one going on now is probably inter-ethnic war. More about religion actually, but it hasn't. I would say it started in the past 4 years. It's not something that's been constant. Like since I was born. I can't remember when I was in like primary school or high school hearing about wars that were going on. The only one that I know, like it changes. I feel like it comes every once in a couple of years, but it's not constant. It's only when matters arise that there's war, which is kind of like a thinking in every country when there's like when people conflict or when countries are not on the same terms, then there's war. But it's not like an ongoing battle like that's been there since.
So it's not as prevalent as in
Yeah.
the changes.
Yeah, it's not. It's definitely not prevalent.
Well, to add to what she's saying, the only war I think my country ever fought, and I don't think there's any country in this world that has ever fought, in this world that has ever fought a war, was the Biafran Civil War from 1967 to 1970. And I wasn't born then, and that was a period when African countries were emerging, from independence and all that. Aside that, there has never been any war in my country. But what we have now is just, little skirmishes that, you always see in countries that are not homogeneous, For example now, if I speak my own language, she can't understand me. And if she speaks her own language, I can understand her. And, if you have that kind of coexistent structure, if you're coexisting that kind of structure in a country, obviously we always cross our paths, we always offend each other, it's not a big deal, it happens everywhere. And every country in the world has, a kind of strata by which they are divided. Africa, we are tribal, no doubt about that. America is all about race. In England, it's all about class. You get what I mean? So it's not a big deal. So when these things happen, we are just helpless, like, we are always the victims because we don't have the press, we don't have anybody, we don't have the medium to tell our own stories. So it's not a big deal. What is happening in my country now, it's not like an ongoing thing. It just happens and, it goes back to the cooler and, it's nothing out of the ordinary. But the main one going on in the country now, that's not religious and it's not ethnic. It's insurgency, and that's a different ballgame. And when there's insurgents, you cannot trace that to whether you're from one tribe or from the other tribe.
So the question that I want to ask you, you made a comment about it being like tribal, where in London you have class and America you have race. Could you just highlight more on what that tribe means? Because one thing that I have personally faced as growing up is a lot of people have this perception that if you're in a tribe, you're in a little village or something like. Can you highlight on that?
Well, I'll use my country as an example because that is what I know very well. In my country, there are over 300 ethnic groups. We have larger tribes, But in terms of ethnic group, we have over 300 ethnic groups. And there is no way you can have that much ethnic group in the country that you're not going to have misunderstanding. I mean, there's no way, because one ethnic group will be bigger than the other ethnic group. And guess what? This configuration was what was left by the colonial masters. When they were leaving, you know, because they wanted to give one ethnic group an edge over the other, because one ethnic group was much more outspoken than the other ethnic group, you know, they said, okay, you know what, we give you power over this other ethnic group. And that is why, you know, whatever negativity you see in Africa right now, that is why we have it there. You know, so for example, I'm from the same tribe with Bambo, but we are from different ethnic groups. You know, that's why I say we operate a very tribal system, because the fact that I come from a particular ethnic group doesn't mean I don't live in the city. You know, so we stay in the city, but we can come from different places. It's just, let me just use this let me use this as an example. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to use the language white and black just for this context, please. For example, I'm white, you black. You know, in Africa, it's just like this. The white people are from the northern part of the country, while the black people are from the southern part of the country. Are you understanding the picture now? So New York is like the melting pot in America where everybody, you know, meets. So the black people will go to New York, the white people will meet in New York, but we all have where we come from in the country. So I have my own ethnic group, you have your own ethnic group. We speak different language, we have different beliefs, but you know, in our diversity, we have our own strengths too. So it's no big deal. And whatever the Western press is always trying to portray is always, you know, like, oh, Africa, you go there, you're not going to survive 1 minute if you go in there. That's a lie.
To piggyback on, to go off of what you said, this whole situation of tribalism, ethnicism, and whatever kind of genocide or clashes we have, specifically in Nigeria, started a long time ago. It started from the creation of the country Nigeria. As soon as Nigeria was amalgamated, meaning joining of the east and west of Nigeria together, you put different tribes of people that readily may or may have not gotten along, and you make yourself call them brothers. That on its own stands to have its own, creates its own dynamics of friction and fraction in there. Moving on from there, in the modern day, we haven't had a lot of clashes. We've had some small ones like the Ife and the Afeke clash that happened many years ago. But you see, clashes like that are actually happening and genocides that are actually going on don't get the media coverage. Instead, if you have a group of 20 militiamen that are kidnapping people in the all-police region of Port Harcourt, that situation gets more media coverage. That situation is exaggerated. So it's not so much of are we getting covered, but it's the fact that the media is choosing what to cover to portray a particular emotion for people all around the world and people in the diaspora.
How about this?
Right, when it comes to South Africa, of recent government, we really have never gone to war. The types of violence that are found in South Africa are things that have to do with the system that we're in, apartheid. During apartheid, there was a lot of ethnic violences, and that was not seen as war in and of itself. Those were just clashes that happened because of the struggle of power. And so that continues to this day. And you know, one of the things that South Africa is known for, or at least however people communicate, is that South Africa is one of the most violent places in South Africa. And it's because of the movies like Tsotsi that have won Oscars, and that's how people perceive South Africa. One other thing that, you know, a lot of people know South Africa about is other xenophobic attacks that happened in South Africa in 2009. Now, I will say that as much as, you know, none of the said wars happened in South Africa, there is a level of violence. There's a level of violence, and my fellow panelists said, you know, the idea is that not that violence does not exist. It does, and I think one of the things that I'll be emphasizing on throughout this whole time is that of all the things that we've been talking about today, they exist. They are there. It's the idea that those things are just viewed in one way. You know, one of the speakers in the video was talking about the idea that it's the idea that one idea is covered. South Africa has a level of crime that should be dealt with, but you will not find violence everywhere. It's not like when you arrive at the airport and there's someone ready to kill you. When you walk the streets, you know, there's someone ready to kill you. And so in South Africa, the violence that is basically predominant is, you know, things like hijacking, muggings, and so on. And you find gangsterism a lot, and it still exists within the context of one ethnic group fighting the other ethnic group. And there's still also a lot of violence and a lot of animosity in terms of races. You find black against white violence. So in South Africa and Southern Africa, there have not been any wars, but when you talk about violence and how it's viewed, it has to do more with people, thinking there's a lot of crime, and everywhere you go, people are killing each other. And those are the stories that are covered, even in the local media. And one of the things that this video we just watched was talking about is the responsibility of the local media. When you look at a lot of newspapers and television broadcasters within South Africa, violence is one of the most predominant things that they talk about. They don't talk about the ways in which the government is trying to curb the ever-rising violence. They don't talk about the work that other people within the community are doing to help that, because crime is caused by so many other factors. It's a very complex idea, and we can't, simplify it. And so I feel like there's a responsibility that even the local media has, but not only that, it's just understanding that although violence exists, there's a history behind it. It's not just barbaric people just choosing to, today we're going to go out and kill. And it's an understanding those type of things that we can start to deal with it and see it as a reality that can be dealt with, and it's not just barbaric human beings.
That's very true. One of my favorite musicians in South Africa got shot, Lucky Dube. But then again, Tupac also got shot. So what's the difference there? Biggie got shot. Yes, Mr. Patrick.
It's a question I try to think about most of the time. Is if there have been conflicts and violence in Africa, who was behind those conflicts?
Okay, that's a question to the house.
Is it only Africans or some other people behind them?
Now, anybody can answer that question. That's open to the audience as well as the panelists.
If there's so much conflict and violence in Africa, yes, sir.
Well, some of it, from what I've read, are definitely religiously based. There's a lot of clashes in countries, not just in Africa, but other places in the world, between Islam and Christianity. So you have that religious pretext going on for a lot of places.
So religion can play a part, yes, Christian?
When you look at the colonization of the entire continent of Africa, you can't help but take in context the dramatic impact that's had on the continent. Because it's one thing, even when you look at, I'm going to draw a correlation between the United States and Africa, the continent, for example. Even when if you look at the civil rights movement that occurred here in the United States, and oftentimes the way that even African Americans are portrayed in the media is very biased and limited. We're portrayed as welfare dependent, violent, uneducated, very negative concept, same way that the whole continent of Africa is portrayed. So when you look at colonization, it's one thing to colonize the entire country and create conflict between interethnic groups, but also think about colonization of the mind. Because if you take people's language or what they know, their culture, and globalization has a dramatic impact across the entire world, but also Africa is being globalized right now as we speak, that it's going to create greater conflict. And you can't remove the context of the history of the different impacts that different countries trying to colonize the continent of Africa, and why there's still conflict to this day between certain groups. It's based in history. You can't take that context out of the picture that far.
Yes, sir.
I think it's real helpful, even like when the panelists indicate what country they're from, because some of it has a little bit to do with that and what part of the country. We've been in Zambia, and very kind, generous people there. I don't see a lot of conflict or violence there. Our son does outreach in the DRC. There's considerably more conflict there. He said even the whole culture, compared to the Zambian culture, the DRC culture, from the adults down to the children, is much more violent. They're much more aggressive. And you can see a day and night difference just between you know, the DRC and Zambia or Zimbabwe or Botswana or something like that, where there's just a lot more peaceful families there. And so I think sometimes, and it's just like in the States or anywhere else, depending on where you're at, sometimes you have more aggressive individuals and people that are fighting or having violence. And I think similarly in Africa, that you have certain pockets in certain areas that you've got more aggression going on. I think the diamond mines and everything that's going on in the DRC, there's just a distrust that people are coming there to rob their minerals. And so there's a real concern about it there.
Oh, I just want to talk a little bit about the DRC. I'm from Rwanda, just like a few hours from there, and the issue that it's really complex because there are so many people involved in the conflict, and when I say people, I say mainly superpowers, because I know people who live there. So they said one of the reasons is that Canadians were responsible, were having benefit from the mine, and then China and the States couldn't agree with the benefits Canada was having, so they tried to kick them out of the mine and take control. So what happened is that since then they tried to give rebel groups arms and then tell them go fight and say that you are from here. But the thing is, they claim themselves to be Rwandans, which is totally absurd. But also, I think we have conflicts there, but that's not really the reason. If we could have a way to get rid of the UN, which has, I think, the most, the biggest number in Africa, just in one town, and just say, you've been here for over than 10 years, what have you done? Nothing. As they stay there, the number will increase, people will get paid, but where does the money come from? It's people who are funding them are also the one who wants benefit from them, from the mine. So it's really controversial to say that Africans are violent. It's not Africans, humans are violent. And I don't see the reason why we should be the only one to be responsible for all the conflicts.
So you think that the UN hasn't had an impact or an influence on any of the...
No.
Listening from what you're saying, I feel like you're driving more to the fact that there are, powers behind the scene controlling a lot of, these conflicts in Africa, which is very understandable because I read about the first president of Ghana. I'm a Ghanaian. I run Ghana. The first president of Ghana, and I read about basically how he was overthrown, because he was a president for about more than 6 years, right? Yeah, he was president for more than 6 years, and essentially he had this mindset of forming the United States of Africa, and that because of that, he was one of the brainchild of that entire idea, and because of that, some powers outside of the continent was not too much into the idea, knowing the amount of resources that the country has, and the amount of I guess productivity that can be generated if that was to happen. So because of that, a coup had to happen, and it was supported by some of American agencies, which you can do your own background research and figure that out. If you want to talk back one-on-one, I'm on camera right now. I don't want to go to jail, so I'm gonna keep you cool, and we're gonna kick off.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and head to the next section. Here's a video.